And this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this point, we'd like to answer any questions that you may have.
So I think the first question, so the first question we have, so currently using paper forms, what's the process to change over to electric forms? Well, I mean, the first step would be to find a vendor who can administer electronic surveys. I mean, I think that, as outcomes becomes more popular, you're going to have more options. But, just sort of shopping around looking for an outcomes vendor that not only has the forms that you want to use. That's probably something I would note, making sure if, based off our presentation, if the AAOS recommended forms are what you want, then I would make sure that the vendor is able to support those questionnaires.
And we have another question here. How do I begin to incorporate AAOS forms into my practice? The list that we provided during the presentation can be found on the AAOS website, and clicking on each individual survey will bring up an example or a copy of the survey, and that would be in paper form. And as Paul mentioned earlier, you can also find a vendor that would be able to administer these forms electronically for you, really freeing up your staff time and allowing data collection on a continuous basis.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions here that I think kind of touch on the same thing, and so I'll address them both. The first is, do you think that the use of CAT-ready forms will continue to be encouraged? And then the next question is, how can PROMIS make us more efficient? And I think that really what we're talking about there is like the number of questions required to get meaningful data. And so, yes, I think that the use of CAT-ready forms will continue to be encouraged, because if we can ask fewer questions while keeping sort of powerful data, I think that's always a good thing for everyone. And as technology, I guess in that space becomes more available, I think it's going to become much more popular. And then sort of tying into that with PROMIS, so there are several PROMIS forms that already use some of this CAT technology. It's really like a bank system where there's a bank of questions, and depending on how a patient answers a certain question determines the next one that they see. So you could have a bank of potentially 100 questions, but the patient's only going to see 5 or 6 of them. It's the same kind of technology, and so I would kind of link those together. I'm sorry, I think that says PROMs. How can PROMs make us more efficient? I'm sorry, not PROMIS. But yeah, so I guess we could tackle that one next. How can PROMs make us more efficient? Well, I mean, kind of like we said in the presentation, you can use the data collected from patient-reported outcomes to have data-driven conversations with the patient, but not just the isolated patient scores. Those scores within the context of a much larger database, I think, is extremely powerful. You can, if a patient who presents with knee pain with certain comorbidities and certain demographics comes in, you could reference a database that has, say, 55,000 other data points for patients with the same profile. And you can set more clear expectations. You know exactly how many follow-ups this patient will likely need. So I think in terms of efficiency, if we sort of correlate that with cost, I think PROMs are extremely important because they're going to give you more insight as to what the patient needs, what treatment they should have, and then what to expect. So we do have another question here. All right, good. So what is the best way to figure out how to align forms to maximize usefulness of the information that is collected? Well, I think that AAOS has done a lot of the work for us. So they've outlined some patient-reported outcomes measures that they find are meaningful. Also, too, if you look at the like I said before about aligning the quality measures you report from MIPS with the patient-reported outcomes surveys that you're collecting, the reason that CMS has published these quality measures is because there's some type of meaning behind those measures. Like you're going to have an increased quality of care by executing these measures. And so I think if you align those things, you'll be not only collecting meaningful data to increase the quality of care for the patient, but you're also satisfying those MIPS initiatives as well.
We have another question here asking, when did value-based care come into effect? And the MACRA rule in 2015 introduced that concept of shifting from that fee-for-service to a value-based care system. And so that's kind of where it enters into the picture. And what MACRA did was create the quality payment program, which streamlines 3 different reporting programs previously through CMS that now allows the focus to be on outcomes-oriented measures. and the value that the system offers. We do have another question here.
Yeah, okay, so this is a good question. So when it comes to compliance rates for obtaining survey PROM results for patients, you have a general average percentage of compliance for clinics, a number that clinics use to compare the compliance rates with other clinics. Yeah, so if we're talking about like within the context of the OBERD system, I can definitely get you some numbers there. So if we're for baseline and 3-month post-op, the OBERD system is going to average an 85% compliance rate, which is pretty good. And there are a number of reasons why we're able to achieve such a high compliance rate. But that number can be used to sort of benchmark across clinics. I would also say that when analyzing your compliance data, the OBERD system is going to provide tools to allow you to look across clinics to see maybe what are some of the variables that are driving compliance in one location versus another location. Yeah, so another good one here. Do these collection systems integrate with my EMR tools? Generally speaking, yes. So if we're thinking about the method of data collection and we're sort of considering the electronic option, I think most vendors nowadays are going to be able to integrate in with existing softwares. I think that's kind of the way of the future. Is, you know, in EMR, but also scheduling systems, and if you have other sort of third-party systems that you're using for like registration or check-in or something, I think that as we move forward, those softwares are going to be required to speak to each other or to integrate in with each other. And so, so yes, generally speaking, these electronic tools are going to be able to integrate in with your EMR, with other systems, so that we can sort of trade data back and forth. Yeah. So there, one last question just trickling in here. So any reason to compare across specialties? Yeah, I think that it would be it could be extremely meaningful to do so, and you could even you know, there are types of data that you can collect that are sort of quote cross-cutting. So you could look at like quality of life metrics and see sort of how quality of life is impacted across varying specialties, and that could be, you know, subspecialties within orthopedics. So you're looking at quality of life for a patient who had, say, like carpal tunnel surgery versus like a total knee replacement. You can see how those things differ. And then really when comparing across specialties becomes meaningful is when you start to pair this outcomes data with other types of data. So like Dr. Prasad was saying before, you know, you can use things like patient satisfaction to satisfy some of the MIPS requirements. So if we have patient satisfaction data and we have quality of life data, and we can look across specialty and across procedures to see how those things are affected by the specialty and by the treatment, I think that there's a lot of meaning there.
And it also really gives us an opportunity to make a difference in population health by using all of this data across specialties. So it's not limited to just one practice or one specific specialty, but we can use that data across the board to really help patients. For more information on OBERD, please visit us at oberd.com.